The house felt larger than ever, though nothing had changed in its size. The walls carried echoes of laughter, now replaced with quiet emptiness. Susan often walked from room to room, hoping to catch a trace of the life that once filled them. Her husband's absence, after 5 long years, still carried a sharp weight. With her children grown and gone, the silence became almost unbearable. Morning routines were no longer routines, but scattered fragments. She brewed coffee out of habit, but half the pot went cold and untouched. The newspaper sat unread, pages folding into themselves, much like her days. Neighbors waved politely, unaware of the heaviness she carried. To them, she was simply Susan, the widow who lived alone at the corner. Grief had softened but not disappeared. It rested in her heart like a shadow, present but quieter than before. Some days she managed to smile, others she fought to even open the blinds. Life moved forward, yet she felt stuck in a place where time refused to heal completely. She wondered if purpose was something reserved only for the young, but beneath the layers of sorrow, there was still a spark. Susan often caught herself thinking of dreams she once held, tucked away behind the roles of wife and mother. Those dreams whispered faintly, asking if she was ready to listen. She had ignored them for too long. Something inside her began to stir. On one particularly lonely afternoon, she opened an old drawer in her bedroom. Among scattered photographs and letters, she found a worn notebook. Its cover was faded, edges curled from age, but her handwriting was still clear. She opened it, and the words on the first page made her heart stop for a moment. There, written in neat cursive, was a dream she had buried decades ago. One day, I will study psychology and help others heal. Susan held the notebook against her chest, her eyes filling with tears. She had written those words as a young woman, long before life changed her path. The memory struck deeply. The silence of the house remained, but now it carried something new. It wasn't just loneliness anymore. It was a question, a possibility. Could she, at 50, start again? Could she pursue a dream that once felt too far away? Susan didn't know the answer yet, but she felt hope flicker quietly inside. Susan spent the next days carrying the notebook with her everywhere. It felt like a secret companion, reminding her of who she once wanted to be. She reread the words again and again, as if they held a hidden key to her future. Each time, the possibility seemed less impossible. Still, doubt lingered, whispering that she was too old. At the grocery store, she overheard 2 young women chatting about their college classes. Their energy and excitement made her chest tighten. Could she ever belong in a classroom full of people their age? She imagined herself sitting among them, feeling like an outsider. The thought both terrified and thrilled her. That night, she sat at her kitchen table with her laptop open. She searched colleges near me and scrolled endlessly through programs. Psychology appeared again and again, each description echoing the dream in her notebook. Her fingers hovered over the Apply Now button, but she pulled them back, heart racing. Fear was loud. Her children called occasionally, checking in but never staying long on the phone. Suzanne wanted to tell them about the notebook, about the idea growing inside her, but she hesitated, worried they might laugh or tell her it was too late. She closed the laptop instead, whispering, maybe tomorrow. Tomorrow turned into a week, and then 2. The notebook sat on her nightstand, quietly waiting. Each morning, she looked at it, and each night, she touched its cover before bed. It became both a comfort and a challenge. Inside her, the battle grew between courage and hesitation. One evening, as she watched the sun set through her window, she remembered her husband's voice. He always encouraged her to keep learning, to never stop growing. "You have so much to give," he once said, smiling at her across the table. His words echoed like a gentle push, urging her forward. With trembling hands, Susan reopened her laptop. This time, she didn't close it. She filled out the first part of the application, her heart pounding as she typed. For the first time in years, she felt alive with purpose. A forgotten dream was slowly finding its way back into the light. The email arrived on a quiet morning, and Susan nearly dropped her coffee when she saw it. "Congratulations. You've been accepted into the psychology program." She read the words aloud, her voice shaking with disbelief. Joy filled her chest, quickly followed by fear. What had she just done? The following days were a whirlwind of preparations. She bought notebooks, pens, and a sturdy backpack, things she hadn't used in decades. Standing in the school supplies aisle, she felt both silly and excited. Young students picked out colorful folders while she quietly chose simple ones. She wondered if they would see her as out of place. Nights became restless as the first day drew near. She lay awake, imagining walking into a classroom filled with strangers. What if they judged her? What if she couldn't keep up? But alongside the fear, she also felt courage. After all, she had survived loss, loneliness, and years of silence. Surely she could face this too. Her children finally learned about her decision during a Sunday phone call. At first, there was silence on the other end. Then, slowly, encouragement came, mixed with surprise. "Mom, that's amazing," her daughter said. "I'm proud of you." Hearing those words gave Susan strength she didn't know she had. The night before classes began, she stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her clothes. She looked older, yes, but there was something different in her eyes. A spark of hope shone there, faint but steady. She whispered to her reflection, "You can do this." The morning of her first class arrived with butterflies in her stomach. She walked across campus, surrounded by students rushing in every direction. Their laughter and chatter made her feel invisible, yet she held her head high. Each step was heavy with fear, but also lightened by courage. As she entered the classroom, her heart raced faster. Dozens of young faces turned to see her. For a moment, Susan felt the urge to run, but then she remembered her notebook, her dream, her husband's words. She took a deep breath, found an empty seat, and sat down. A new chapter of her life had just begun. The classroom buzzed with chatter as Susan tried to blend in quietly. She sat near the back, clutching her notebook as though it could protect her. The professor introduced himself with energy, speaking quickly about the course and expectations. Susan scribbled notes frantically, afraid of missing something important. The words felt overwhelming, yet exciting at the same time. Around her, students laughed softly at inside jokes she didn't understand. Their ease with one another reminded her of how much younger they were. Susan felt the gap in years more clearly than ever before. She tugged nervously at her sweater, wishing she could disappear. But deep down, she reminded herself she had chosen to be here. When the professor asked everyone to introduce themselves, her palms grew sweaty. One by one, names and majors filled the air. "Hi, I'm Emily, and I'm 18. I'm Jason, and I want to be a counselor." Then it was Susan's turn. She cleared her throat, voice trembling. "I'm Susan, and I'm 50. The room went silent for a moment. Then a few smiles spread across young faces. Someone whispered, "That's cool," and others nodded. The professor beamed at her, saying, "It's never too late to learn." Relief washed over her like a wave. For the first time that day, she felt seen and not judged. After class, Susan walked through the campus, her steps lighter than when she arrived. She marveled at the energy of students rushing around, holding coffee cups and backpacks. It felt like stepping into another world, one she had left long ago. Instead of feeling out of place, she began to feel part of something bigger. That night, she spread her new textbooks across the kitchen table. The sight filled her with both dread and determination. She read the first chapter slowly, underlining key phrases, just as she had done years ago with her children's homework. This time, though it was for her, this time, the dream was hers. Susan went to bed with exhaustion, but also a quiet joy. She had survived her first day. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Lying in the dark, she whispered a prayer of thanks and promised herself she wouldn't give up. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, and she was ready to face them. The following weeks brought a rhythm Susan hadn't known in years. Classes, assignments, and library hours filled her days. She carried her backpack proudly, though sometimes her shoulders ached from the weight. In the evenings, she sat at her kitchen table, papers spread everywhere, fighting to keep up. It was difficult, but she felt alive. Still, memories of her husband often slipped into her thoughts. She remembered how he once encouraged her to chase her passions, even when life grew busy. His absence was sharpest when she longed to share her small victories. She often imagined his smile, nodding at her progress, whispering, "I knew you could." One night, overwhelmed by assignments, Susan nearly broke down. The textbooks seemed endless, the theories too complex. She buried her face in her hands, tears threatening to fall. For a moment, quitting seemed easier, safer. But then her eyes landed on the old notebook on her desk, the words that started it all. She picked it up, tracing the faded letters with her fingers. "One day, I will study psychology and help others heal." The sentence reminded her why she had begun. It wasn't about perfection, it was about purpose. Slowly, she wiped her tears, opened her laptop, and returned to her work. The days grew into weeks, and Susan's persistence paid off. She began to understand concepts that once seemed impossible. Her notes became more organized, her confidence stronger. Each small victory reminded her that resilience mattered more than speed. She was learning not just psychology, but her own strength. In class, Susan started speaking up more. Her perspective, shaped by life experiences, added depth to discussions. Younger students began to notice her insights, nodding thoughtfully when she shared. For the first time, she didn't feel like an outsider. She felt like she belonged. That night, Susan stood by her window, looking out at the quiet street. For the first time since her husband's passing, she felt proud of herself. She whispered, "I'm still here, and I'm still growing." The loneliness hadn't disappeared, but hope was now stronger than grief. It happened during a group project, when Susan was paired with 3 younger students. At first, she felt invisible as they exchanged quick jokes and texts, but one of them, a young woman named Emily, noticed Susan's hesitation. "Do you want to start with your ideas?" Emily asked kindly. Susan's heart warmed at the invitation. As they worked together, Susan realized Emily was genuinely curious about her thoughts. They shared laughter over mistakes and encouraged one another. The age difference slowly faded into the background. What mattered was the teamwork, the shared goal. Susan discovered she could connect with people decades younger than herself. After class, Emily walked with Susan across campus. "I think it's amazing that you're doing this," she said. "My mom always talks about wanting to go back to school, but she's too scared." Susan smiled, touched by the words. "It's scary for me too," she admitted, "but fear can't stop us forever." That conversation sparked a bond that grew quickly. Emily began stopping by Susan's table at the library, sometimes studying together. She asked for advice on personal challenges, and Susan listened with patience. In return, Emily explained modern tools and study apps, helping Susan stay organized. They became unexpected allies. The friendship filled a space in Susan's heart that had been empty for years. It wasn't the same as the companionship she lost, but it was something new and healing. She felt valued, not just as a student, but as a person with wisdom worth sharing. Emily's presence gave her days a brighter rhythm. One afternoon, Emily introduced Susan to her friends. At first, Susan felt nervous, but soon she was laughing along with their stories. The fear of being out of place began to fade. She realized that connection wasn't about age, but about openness. And for the first time in years, Susan felt young again. That night, Susan sat on her couch, smiling as she replayed the day. She had gained more than a classmate. She had found a friend. Hope spread quietly in her heart, reminding her that life could still surprise her. She didn't know what challenges awaited, but she no longer faced them alone. The semester grew heavier with each passing week. Papers piled high, deadlines loomed, and Susan felt the weight pressing down on her. She stared at the endless readings, her mind foggy and tired. Doubt returned, whispering cruelly that she didn't belong here. The courage that once carried her now felt thin. One late night, Susan sat at her desk, the clock ticking past midnight. Her eyes burned from exhaustion as she tried to finish an essay. Words blurred on the screen, her fingers hovering uselessly above the keyboard. Frustration welled up, and tears spilled before she could stop them. She wanted to quit, to escape the pressure. The next morning, Susan skipped her class for the first time. She sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at her coffee. The silence of the house felt heavier than ever, pulling her back into old loneliness. Fear whispered that she had been foolish to start this journey. Perhaps it was too late after all. Emily noticed her absence and sent a text. "Are you okay? Want me to bring notes?" Susan hesitated, ashamed to admit her struggle, but eventually, she typed back, "I'm just tired. Maybe I made a mistake." Minutes later, Emily replied, "You didn't. Don't give up yet. You inspire me more than you know." The words lit a small flame in Susan's heart. She didn't feel inspiring, but Emily's faith reminded her that she wasn't alone. Susan wiped her tears and opened her laptop again. Slowly, she began typing, one sentence at a time. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. By evening, the essay was finished. It wasn't her best work, but it was something she had created through perseverance. She felt relief wash over her as she pressed submit. That simple click felt like reclaiming a piece of her courage. She had survived the storm, at least for now. Susan went to bed, exhausted but strangely proud. She had faced the urge to quit and resisted it. The struggle wasn't over, but resilience had carried her through. As she closed her eyes, she wondered what other victories might be waiting just beyond the fear. The day the professor returned their essays, Susan's hands trembled. She expected failure, imagining red marks and harsh comments. When the paper landed on her desk, her breath caught. A bold B+ was written at the top, with a note, "Strong insights, keep going." Her eyes filled with tears of relief. Susan held the paper close, reading the words again and again. It wasn't a perfect grade, but it was more than she had hoped for. It was proof that her efforts mattered, that she could still learn and succeed. Hope rushed back, stronger than before. She smiled through her tears. Emily leaned over, grinning. "See, I told you," she whispered. Susan laughed softly, gratitude swelling in her chest. It wasn't just the grade, it was the validation, the reassurance that she belonged in that classroom. For the first time, she allowed herself to truly believe it. That evening, Susan treated herself to a small celebration. She baked her favorite chocolate cake, filling the house with warmth and sweetness. As she sat with a slice at the table, she whispered, "This is just the beginning." She realized the victory wasn't just academic, it was personal, deeply transformative. The following week, Susan raised her hand more often in class. She spoke with more confidence, her voice steady and sure. Her classmates listened, nodding thoughtfully at her perspectives. Instead of shrinking, she began to take up space. Each word was a step toward reclaiming her worth. The small victory gave her new energy. She organized her study schedule, balanced her assignments, and began tutoring Emily on life lessons in return. It felt like a fair exchange, youth and technology for wisdom and experience. Together, they grew stronger. That night, Susan stood in front of the mirror again. She no longer saw only the widow who had lost her way. She saw a student, a learner, a woman in transformation. Hope wasn't just flickering anymore, it was glowing. During a group exercise, the professor asked students to practice active listening, while others rushed to share their opinions. Susan simply listened. She nodded, asked gentle questions, and gave each person space to speak. When it was her turn, several classmates commented on how heard and valued they felt. Susan realized something important in that moment. Psychology wasn't just about theories or textbooks, it was about presence, compassion, and understanding. And those were things life had already taught her. Her years of experience, her struggles and losses, had shaped her into someone who could truly listen. Later, Emily confessed, "You make people feel safe. That's rare." The words touched Susan deeply. For so long, she had felt invisible, but now she was discovering a gift within herself. Maybe her dream wasn't just about finishing a degree, was about using her life's journey to help others heal. In class discussions, Susan began leaning into her strengths. She shared stories carefully, connecting lessons to real experiences. Students listened more closely, drawn not just to her words but to the authenticity behind them. For the first time, Susan felt that her age was not a burden, it was a gift. That evening, she reflected on how listening had shaped her own healing. After her husband's death, few had truly listened to her pain. Now, she could be that presence for others. In giving what she once needed, she found a sense of purpose blooming inside her. The professor noticed her skill and praised her in front of the class. "Susan, you have a natural ability for this field," he said warmly. Her cheeks flushed, but her heart swelled with pride. The words became another stone laid firmly in the foundation of her new beginning. Susan walked home that day with a lighter step. The world felt brighter, the air fresher, as though life itself was cheering her on. She whispered to herself, "Maybe this is who I was always meant to be." And for the first time, she truly believed it. Susan noticed the shift slowly, almost like dawn breaking. Where once she had felt invisible, now her classmates sought her out. They asked about her life, her journey, and the wisdom she carried. She, in turn, asked about their hopes, fears, and ambitions. A bridge was forming between generations. During one group lunch, a student said, "It's amazing hearing your perspective. It makes the lessons real." Susan smiled, humbled. She realized she wasn't just learning from them, they were learning from her too. Her age was no longer a barrier but a gift that enriched the classroom. At first, she had been afraid of standing out. Now, she embraced it. Her stories of resilience and courage inspired her peers, many of whom struggled quietly with their own battles. Susan showed them that struggles didn't end in youth. They shaped strength for the future. Emily, especially, began introducing her as "my friend Susan, the wisest person I know." At first, Susan laughed it off, but deep down, it filled her heart. She was no longer just the widow who had lost her way. She was a mentor, a presence that mattered. Professors noticed, too. They often turned to her during discussions, asking for her perspective. Each time, Susan felt her confidence grow. She wasn't just a student trying to catch up. She was contributing something valuable. She belonged here, fully and truly. One afternoon, a younger classmate confessed, "I was thinking of dropping out, but you've shown me it's worth pushing through." Susan's eyes welled with tears. She hadn't realized the impact she was having. Her resilience was becoming a light for others, not just herself. Walking home that day, Susan thought about her husband. She whispered, "You'd be proud of me." And for the first time, she didn't feel sadness at the thoughts, she felt gratitude. His love had shaped her, but her future was now her own. The seasons changed. And so did Susan. She noticed joy returning in the smallest of moments, birds singing outside her window, laughter echoing on campus, even the challenge of late-night study sessions. Life no longer felt like something to endure, but something to embrace. Instead of avoiding people, she sought connections. She joined study groups, attended campus events, and even tried yoga at the student center. Awkward at first, these moments became opportunities for laughter and growth. She was no longer just surviving, she was living. Emily often invited Susan to coffee after class. They talked not only about school but about dreams, fears, and life itself. Susan realized she had gained more than a degree. She had gained friendships that nourished her soul. These connections reminded her that beginnings could happen at any age. One weekend, she took a walk through the park she used to visit with her husband. For years, it had been a place of sorrow. This time, she smiled as children played and couples strolled by. The park no longer felt like a reminder of loss, but a celebration of life. Susan began journaling again, something she hadn't done since her 20s. Her entries were filled with gratitude, courage, and hopes for the future. Each page became a reminder that transformation wasn't a single moment, but a continuous journey. Her children noticed the change in her voice during phone calls. "Mom, you sound happy," her son said one evening. Susan laughed softly. "I am," she admitted, surprised at how true it felt. She had rediscovered joy, not through others, but within herself. That night, she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in years, her heart felt light. She whispered, "Thank you, life, for giving me another chance." Hope wasn't just a flicker anymore. It was a flame guiding her forward. The end of the semester approached, bringing with it final exams. Anxiety returned, sharp and demanding. Piles of notes and textbooks covered her kitchen table, and Susan felt the pressure mounting. Despite all her progress, she worried that failure might undo everything. She studied late into the night, eyes heavy and hands aching from writing. The material seemed endless, and self-doubt whispered again, "What if you can't do this?" Susan paused, took a deep breath, and reminded herself of the battles she had already survived. She was stronger now. Emily and a few classmates invited her to join a study group. At first, Susan hesitated, worried she might slow them down. But when she arrived, she found herself contributing just as much as the others. Her insights helped explain complex concepts, and the group left grateful for her presence. During the exams, Susan's heart pounded as she turned each page. Questions blurred together, but she steadied herself with slow breaths. She remembered her professor's words, "It's never too late to learn." One by one, she answered, trusting both her studies and her intuition. When the final test ended, Susan walked out into the crisp winter air. Relief washed over her, mingling with exhaustion. She had given her best, and that was enough. For the first time, she didn't measure success by perfection, but by courage. That evening, she sat quietly with a cup of tea. She reflected on how far she had come since the silence of her empty house. The woman who once doubted her every step was now a student finishing her first semester. It was more than progress, it was transformation. As she drifted to sleep, Susan thought of the future with anticipation rather than fear. The journey wasn't over, but she had already proven something powerful. Resilience had carried her this far, and it would carry her further still. The morning of graduation arrived with golden sunlight streaming through Susan's window. She slipped into the cap and gown, her hands trembling as she fastened the zipper. Standing in front of the mirror, she hardly recognized herself. The widow who once felt lost had become a woman reborn. Her eyes shone with quiet pride. At the ceremony, rows of students in matching gowns filled the stage. Susan walked among them, feeling both part of the group and set apart by her journey. When her name was called, she stepped forward with steady feet. Applause filled the hall, but what echoed loudest was the beating of her own heart. Her children cheered from the audience, tears in their eyes. They held signs and waved proudly, shouting her name. Susan's gaze found them instantly. And for a moment she felt the weight of every sacrifice, every night of doubt, every step of courage. All of it had led to this one radiant moment. As she accepted her diploma, Susan's mind traveled back to the notebook. She remembered the faded handwriting, the long-buried dream. Now, it wasn't just words on paper, it was reality in her hands. She had done it. She had proven to herself that it was never too late to start again. The ceremony ended with laughter, hugs, and endless photographs. Susan posed with classmates who had become friends, their arms wrapped around her shoulders. "We couldn't have done it without you," one of them whispered. Her heart swelled, knowing she had given and received more than she ever imagined. Later that evening, Susan sat quietly at home, with her diploma resting on the table. She touched it gently, as though afraid it might disappear. "We did it," she whispered, speaking to her husband's memory. For once, her words weren't filled with sadness, but with gratitude. Graduation wasn't the end of her story, it was the beginning of a new chapter. Hope glowed brightly in her chest, guiding her toward a future still unfolding. Susan smiled through tears, ready for what came next. After graduation, Susan volunteered at a local community center. The building was small and humble, but inside it held stories waiting to be heard. She sat across from people struggling with grief, anxiety, and loneliness. Each time, she listened with compassion, offering presence more than answers. At first, she felt nervous. Would anyone take her seriously without years of practice? But soon she realized that her life had already prepared her. Her own experiences gave depth to her empathy, and people left her sessions feeling lighter, more hopeful. She wasn't just studying psychology anymore, she was living it. One afternoon, a woman confessed, "I feel invisible since my husband passed." The words struck Susan deeply, echoing her own past. Instead of offering cliches, she simply nodded, saying softly, "I understand." Tears filled the woman's eyes, and for the first time, she felt truly seen. Susan knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. Her work at the center became more than volunteering. It became her purpose. She felt joy returning with every conversation, every smile of relief from someone who felt understood. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. It was healing. Her children visited one weekend and watched her in action. They saw the way people respected and trusted her. "Mom, you've found your calling," her daughter said proudly. Susan smiled, her heart swelling with love and fulfillment. This was what she had been searching for all along. That as weeks passed, word spread about her kindness and wisdom. More people came to the center, eager for her guidance. Susan didn't see herself as extraordinary, just someone who had chosen courage over fear. But to those she helped, she was a light in the dark. Each evening, Susan walked home with a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. Her journey had been long and painful, but now it was filled with meaning. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was thriving. One quiet evening, Susan sat by her window, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. She reflected on the years of silence, the grief that once consumed her, and the courage that brought her here. Her journey wasn't about replacing the past, it was about honoring it while embracing the future. She opened her old notebook once more, tracing the faded words with her fingers. "One day, I will study psychology and help others heal." She smiled, knowing she had kept that promise to herself. The dream that once seemed impossible had become the very fabric of her life. Susan thought about the people she had met along the way, Millie, her classmates, the community she now served. Each had touched her story, just as she had touched theirs. Life had woven their paths together in a tapestry of resilience, courage, and hope. She realized that her greatest achievement wasn't the diploma or even her new career. It was the transformation within herself, the shift from despair to purpose, from loneliness to connection. She had proven that age was never a limit, only a beginning. Her children often asked what kept her going. Susan's answer was simple: hope. Hope had carried her through loss, through fear, and into new beginnings. Hope had reminded her that life was not over at 50, it was only unfolding. As the last light of day faded, Susan whispered to herself, "It's never too late to begin again." The words were not just a reflection, but a declaration. They belonged to her story, her truth, her legacy. And with that, she closed the notebook gently, her heart full of peace. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new joys, but tonight, Susan rested in the certainty that she had transformed her life and inspired others to do the same.